So here's your warm-up. You guys should have already gotten this down. I just picked 4 out of the 9 biomes. So we're just going to look at these biomes right now because it's kind of overwhelming to look at all 9 of them. So when we look at these biomes, I want you guys to have big general ideas of what these biomes are. Again, the minute details are not super important. And to be honest, I don't actually find a lot about biomes when I go through all of the multiple choice on the AP released exams. You definitely need to know about them, but the big ones they always talk about are like the really important ones that you guys have heard a lot about, like so rainforests and coral reefs. But we're still going to go through them. You will be tested on them, but again, it's not important to remember every single fine detail. So up to the left here, we have the chaparral, okay? This is found in California and the Mediterranean. It's like this scrubby little area. It's got low-lying bushes, and again, it's just like a whole bunch of, I just call it like scrub, okay? So it's kind of dry areas. They're in coastal areas. So because they're on the coast, they're going to have much milder climates. Remember we talked about how water insulates different areas of land, and it insulates things because it has a high specific heat. It takes a lot of energy in order to change the temperature. So the chaparral, they're going to have milder climates. They might have like a rainier and a drier season, but they're not going to be like crazy winter and summer like we have here in Wisconsin. Number 2, we see zebras, right? And we see some small trees. You might see, let me get a better picture. This is the savanna. So what you might see are acacia trees. You guys know these trees that look like the African trees here. Those you'll see a lot. I mean, I saw these all over when I was in Africa. So anything that kind of looks like this is savanna, okay? So a savanna, think Africa, okay? They have a wet and a dry season. It looks completely different. In the dry season, everything's dried up. I was there in the dry season, super, super dusty. In the wet season, there's lots of vegetation around and lots of rain. All right, up here you could have said, actually no, you couldn't have said taiga or tundra. This is the taiga. I was going to say that you could say tundra, but the tundra is actually too cold to support these plants. The tundra has permafrost, and that permafrost doesn't let big, tall trees go into the ground, so they can't get their roots all the way into the ground. And so we have big pine trees in the taiga, but not in the tundra. Like the North Pole, we don't get a lot of high vegetation. So the taiga, this is found in northern latitudes like Canada. You know, you can kind of start to see some of this in northern Wisconsin with the pine tree forests, Russia. And then number 4, temperate. You'll see this deciduous forest, or you might see it as seasonal forest, okay? This is the problem with a lot of these biomes, is they're called by different names, okay? So you might hear some of these, like number 3, you'll hear as a boreal forest. And that's kind of the hardest thing, and I think that's why they don't end up testing you on a lot of these, is because scientists call them different names. So there's not like a universal name. There's a whole bunch of different names that kind of mean the same thing. So savannas, you'll hear them called, you know, tropical grasslands sometimes. So there's different names here, okay? All right, so I need you to get out your note packet. We're going to take some notes on different biomes, but I want to start by talking about the coral reefs and the marine biomes that we left off on. So you'll need to go to page 5, where it has the marine biomes. So you don't have this on your page necessarily, but I just kind of made this graphic. I do want you, where it says marine biomes, I would like you to write down that they're characterized by salinity, depth, and water flow. So where it says marine biomes, before all those numbers on your sheet, write this down, that they're characterized by salinity, depth, and water flow. You should be able to tell me that terrestrial biomes, like on land, right, are influenced mainly by temperature and precipitation. Okay, so when we get into land, or into water, it's not just temperature, precipitation, because if you think about it, the rain doesn't really have that big of an impact on the ocean or rivers or whatever. So instead, we look at salinity, the amount of salt, okay? So is it freshwater or saltwater? The depth, is it really shallow like a coral reef where it's going to be really warm? Or is it really, really deep where maybe there's not a lot of photosynthesis happening? And then we have water flow. So is it a pond or a lake where there isn't a lot of water moving? Or is it a river or something like that where we get a lot of water moving? So we have two different categories. We have freshwater biomes and marine biomes. I didn't really put freshwater biomes on there because I figured you guys know them. You know streams and rivers. A stream is a small river. Okay. We have lakes and ponds. We have wetlands, which are marshy areas. Okay. Now, wetlands are one of the most productive ecosystems. Okay. So you can keep that in mind. Marine biomes, salt marshes, mangrove swamps, coral reefs, open ocean. Again, you don't really need to write anything except for characterized by salinity, depth, and water flow. Okay. So we went through the zones, just a refresher on this. We said limnetic zone is the open water, profundal zone is really deep, the benthic zone, that mucky bottom, and littoral zone is where we get all of that vegetation and grass by the shore. Okay. So when we talk about lakes, like you guys did that drawing, we talked about eutrophication, okay, in previous chapters. So I'm going to give you a second to write this down. So write these down. We have what are called oligotrophic lakes, okay? So remember, troph means feeding. We talked about trophic levels, okay? So oligotrophic lakes are lakes with low nutrients and low productivity. So they don't have a lot of nutrients, and as a result, they can't be very productive because without nutrients, they can't create a lot of new biomass or a lot of new plants and animals, okay? This really grainy picture also says, so it says low nutrient levels, good light penetration, because there's not a lot of algae in here, right? High dissolved oxygen, okay? So they have low nutrients, low productivity. Now we talked about eutrophication. This would be lakes with high nutrients. We talked about runoff from fertilizers with nitrogen and phosphorus, and that creates high nutrients, so we get a lot of productivity and we get all of this green algae slime. Now, ideally, you want something in the middle, okay, which we actually call mesotrophic lakes, okay? So you don't want something with too few nutrients or too many nutrients, something kind of right in the middle. Give you another second to write these two down. Okay, so two types of lakes. So that's really all I need you to know about freshwater biomes. Okay, wetlands, they're super productive. They're like, and we've got some lakes, and we can characterize them based on do they have a ton of nutrients, not very many, or kind of a middle amount. So when we go to saltwater, we've got lots of different biomes. I wrote most of these down for you. Okay, so salt marshes. Here's what a salt marsh looks like. Looks like a regular marsh or wetland. The key here is that it's usually found where like a river meets an ocean. Okay, so we get a mix of salt and fresh water. Okay, super productive. Again, any kind of marshy, swamp, wetland area is going to be really productive. And they're found in estuaries. We're going to talk about estuaries, but estuaries are basically where, you know, a river meets an ocean, okay? So we'll talk about that. So it's on the coast, it's a marsh, and it has salt water. That's what you need to know, okay? Mangrove swamps. Okay, these are found in the tropics. The trees here are on the coast of the ocean, so they're salt tolerant, which is unique, right? We talked about how they protect the coast from erosion, their habitat for fish, some of the same things that coral reefs do, right? So very similar. Anytime we get something on the edge of a coast, You could say the same thing for salt marshes. Help prevent erosion, provide habitat for fish. These are all great options if you were to have like a free response question, because I know that's something that's often talked about. It's like, oh, list some ecosystem services. You don't have to memorize all the specific ones. Just know, hey, it's on a coast. It probably provides protection. Hey, it probably provides, you know, income for fishermen or whatever. So I showed you all these pictures. Now we have intertidal zone. Again, self-explanatory. Where is it? It is in between the tides. So we have low tide and high tide, right? And in between, we have the area that gets flooded when it's high tide, and when low tide, it recedes and then it doesn't have as much water. So you'll see like lots of little like tide pools. There's not a pool here, but imagine there was one. You'll see a lot of little like pools. You'll see starfish and whatever, usually like rocky areas. So it's the coastline between high and low tide, okay? Again, you have to have species that can adapt to different temperatures, because imagine if that water is coming in, it's going to be really cold from the ocean. But then if the ocean recedes, right, at low tide, and we've got that water in here, it's going to warm up from the sun. So we've got to have species that are willing to adapt. And then we have coral reefs. Okay, so warm, shallow waters beyond the shoreline. It is the most diverse biome. Circle that. Put a star. Exclamation mark. Okay, so you need to know that. So coral reefs, we talk about their threats. So that's what we're going to talk about next. What are they, and what are their threats? Okay, a lot of information on this page. I'm going to cover some of it up. Take a second, write down the definition of coral. Mutualistic relationship between polyps and algae. So the algae provide food. They also give that coral color and oxygen, and the polyp provides the home and some nutrients. So if we look at this coral picture, this shows us the coral anatomy here. We've got our little polyps here, and then inside, see all these little cells? These cells have algae, okay? These are where the algae are. They're tiny, tiny little things. So the actual polyp is what we can see here, and then the algae is in the actual polyp in tiny little compartments, okay? So you have this written down. What the heck is a coral reef then? It's just a whole bunch of coral together, okay? So remember, they secrete limestone. The limestone remains when the polyp dies, and we still end up getting coral reefs. Now, we want the algae and the polyps to continue living, but, you know, we'll have those skeletons that continue on even if that algae is dead, because you guys have seen those bleached coral remains like the skeletons, okay? All right, so what services do they provide? Let's write these down. So they remove carbon dioxide, right? So they're part of the ocean. They remove CO2, provide habitat, nurseries. This is where baby fish can go and grow up, just like a nursery for kids is where small kids go and get taken care of. Fisheries, you guys wrote tourism, okay? So tourism could be another one, right? Income, protection from the shore. So there's lots of different things. So threats to coral reefs, okay? Again, super overwhelming slide. So the biggest threats we have here, you can just write this after your that dash mark or at that first bullet point. Threats to coral reefs. So 2, right here, coastal development and overfishing, right? So development of the coast, that means putting in big all-inclusive resorts or shopping malls or just homes, right? Developing the coast because as we get more people, right, they're basically going to, they might add pollutants to the water, there might be more people in the water using it. So coastal development threatens coral reefs. Overfishing. If we fish all the fish out, or we're constantly using all these boats that scrape the bottom of the ocean, all these nets, we're going to ruin the coral reefs. Another threat, coral bleaching, right? So when the algae inside the coral dies, corals turn white and they die as well. So it expels the algae. Remember, the algae gives it color. So you can kind of see that in this picture. I'll move it in a second. What we see is this is healthy coral. Here's all the little algae, okay, that lives with it. And when it gets bleached, all that algae gets expelled. And then we get the dead coral. And basically the bad kind of algae, like mold, covers it, okay? So corals turn white and die. So the next thing we're going to talk about is ocean acidification, okay? So if we look at this graph, maybe, there we go. If we look at this graph, the red line is CO2. We know CO2 is rising, okay? Green is CO2 in the seawater, right? And then pH. So CO2 is acidic, right? So remember, if it's acidic, that means it's going to bring the pH lower because acidic pH is 0 to 7, right? So as our CO2 is increasing, more of that's getting dissolved in the ocean, and it's bringing the actual pH of the seawater down to more acidic. And that acidic seawater is actually causing some shells to basically decay, to get eaten up by that acid. Okay, so increase in acidity of the Earth's ocean caused by uptake of CO2. And I'm actually going to change this. Caused by increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay. And I'm going to write that it weakens corals and shells. So it increases the acidity because there's more CO2 in the atmosphere from the climate change, and so more of it's going into the ocean, and then it weakens the corals and the shells. So the last thing we're going to talk about, the ocean has zones as well, but there aren't really as many of them, and you guys already know one. So the ocean also has a benthic zone. It's the bottom. It's the mucky bottom of the ocean, okay? Now, if you go into marine science, there are bajillions of zones in the ocean. You only really need to know a couple, okay? We're not going to get super in-depth because you don't have to know all of them, but there are like really technical terms for all of the zones, like all 10 of them in the ocean. So all you need to know is the open ocean is the deep water that's away from the shoreline. So open ocean. So it would basically be any open water. Again, you can see some of these crazy names. We don't need to know all of these. Okay. So open ocean, just away from the shoreline. Okay. And then we have the photic zone. This is where we have photosynthesis. We've got algae. And then in the aphotic zone, A means not, so not photic. You might also see this as euphotic zone. Again, scientists use different names. You may have seen that in the lakes too. The aphotic zone, there's no photosynthesis, so bacteria end up being the producers. And they use chemosynthesis. So chemosynthesis is basically where we have organisms, especially down at these deep sea vents. They're able to take some of those molecules that come out of those vents and use them as energy. Okay, so things like sulfur. So rather than using sunlight or like eating things, they can actually take chemicals from that water and use it to create energy. And this is called chemosynthesis. All right, so that's where we're going to stop today. Now, I want to, the sub's going to give you a handout of the biomes. So the first thing I need you to do when you get this biome handout, so I need you to copy down, take a marker or just a colored pen or something, and you're going to need to write down which of these is the temperature line. So see, the red is the temperature line up here. So on your sheet, I would like you to color like the temperature line red on here. You can color a different color if you want, but you're just going to need to be able to figure out the difference between the temperature and the precipitation line. So you can have, I will leave this up on the computer. You can have the sub pause it here. We're going to be looking at trends, okay? So we're going to look at trends in temperature and precipitation because you guys shouldn't have to memorize all this stuff. I don't want you to memorize individual like graphs of different things. I just want you to know the trends because it's going to take way too long for you guys to memorize all of this different stuff. Okay, so we're looking at trends. I will leave this document up on my computer so you can ask the sub to scroll down on it. Actually, I'll just scroll and then the sub can use the video. So the second one, the red line is going to be on the top, and then on the back page, the red line is the big hill, okay, on both of them, okay? So you're going to be looking at these and just analyzing different patterns in them. You do need to know the biomes and the different biomes, but you don't need to know them in crazy detail, okay? All right, so that is it. Reminder, if you have not turned in your multiple choice, you need to turn in your multiple choice. It is due today. Your test is next Thursday, okay? So that's coming up. So beware of that. All right, that's it. Have a great day, and I will see you on Monday.